How are you guys? Welcome back to Wargaming China, the free channel where I platform my understandings of the war of resistance against Japanese aggression in China from 1931 to 1945. And if you know this channel, you know I do it for wargamers mainly, toy soldier enthusiasts, and anybody who likes a bit of obscure history. And let's face it, it doesn't get much more obscure than the stuff on this channel. Okay, so what are we looking at? We're looking at elements. Well, we're looking at the Japanese 6th Division of the 11th Army, and it's late September 1938, and we're about 40 kilometers northeast of Tianjiazhen Fortress. Now, Tianjiazhen Fortress guards the Yangtze River, and General Shido Inabe and his 6th Division by late September had advanced from Anqing. When Anqing fell, the 6th Division had been advancing from there along the edge of the Derby Mountains, and after 3 months, this was as far as it had got. Sometimes the 6th Division's advance had been restricted to 10 kilometers in 2 weeks, and sometimes it got as much as 15 kilometers in 3 weeks. Very hard going for the men in the 6th Division. Now, by mid-September, it had found itself trapped on 3 sides by men under the supreme command of Chen Chen. And these forces would be RDF forces. So how is it that the men of the RDF have succeeded in trapping the 6th Division, a much weakened division? This is going to be a long one. So if you don't like my waffle, piss off now. Otherwise, go get yourself a drink, and I'll explain what's been going on to the rear. Okay, so in China, as I said, Matan has fallen, and that was a great shock to China. And following the fall of Matan, the RDF had found itself reinforced with regular government troops and 1 or 2 Germanized formations. Now, although these troops were sent to reinforce the RDF, by the time, I told you this was going to be a long one. Maybe I've got ahead of myself. Okay, so the 6th Division has found itself trapped, and to its backs are the waters of the Yangtze River. Why is this? Because the Yangtze River is 40 kilometers away. It is because Chiang, as a knee-jerk reaction after the fall of Matan, had looked at the success of his Yellow River floods and thought to use tactical flooding along the Yangtze to delay the Japanese advance. And of course, well, in hindsight, and as history goes, we know now that this was a mistake, and I'm going to explain why. Now, I want us to think about events in the rear in China in this period, by September 1938. Now, by September 1938, the Japanese army was not in a situation where it was combing the rear to reinforce its front line. It was actually in the situation of combing the front line for troops to guard its rear. There was unrestricted guerrilla warfare in China now. And these operations were countless, numerous pinpricks, as indeed guerrilla warfare is, the war of the flea. But they hurt the Japanese. And I'll give you an example of along the Yangtze itself. Along the Yangtze itself, the Chinese Navy had still been successfully, Chinese naval officers had still been successfully commanding forces and laying naval mines along the river. And even on the banks of the river, that there was Chinese light artillery and Chinese guerrilla forces that would regularly try to interdict and intercept Japanese supply columns, both along the river and to the rear. Now, it was so bad for the 6th Division that by mid-September, more than half of its strength of its combat strength was designated to guarding the supply routes, to escorting the supply columns. And this was because the terrain along the Yangtze was not very good for any kind of sustained military operations, especially a drive forward, no roads, endless ridges, sharp rocks, scrubland. Very, very difficult for an army to keep going through day after day. And with the Darby Mountains not in Japanese hands, Chinese regular forces were free to conduct guerrilla operations against the Japanese rear, which was decimating their supply columns. So I'll give you an example. For when the supplies for the 6th Division were unloaded at Anqing, it would be 200 kilometers to Guangxi. But don't think of a road, think of just a path or a route. All of it had to be transported by the odd truck, because the Japanese army didn't have many trucks, and mules, donkeys on the backs of men, and it had to be guarded. And as I said, the guerrilla operations were really affecting not only the 6th Division. This is just an example of it. If we look at the areas Beiping and Tianjiazhen, there where the communists are conducting guerrilla warfare, well, they are the masters of guerrilla warfare. So all these flea bites from Chinese forces throughout occupied China, in Manchuria, the rise of their anti-Japanese volunteer armies is still ongoing. The communists are now very strong in the flooded areas of the Yellow River. And as I said, the communists are masters of these kind of operations. Unfortunately, they're not really suitable for 20mm or rapid fire, but I feel that in the future I might do something in 28mm for the smaller, guerrilla actions. So, and even in Shanghai, the Green Gang, Big Eared Du, was conducting a very sophisticated spy network and assassination program. And this was hurting the Japanese. So by late September, or by mid-September, sorry, the Japanese were really struggling hard. And as I say again, we'll use the 6th Division as an example, were really struggling to support and sustain their troops in the field, let alone support an attack, an assault on an enemy position. Now, as I said, as a knee-jerk reaction, Chiang had started a series of what he would feel were tactical floods. And I mean, it's not hard to see. It's easy to agree with him. It's a knee-jerk reaction as to what to do, but the long-term consequences of it were horrific, especially when we look at the actual Japanese advance along the Yangtze, which was the source of this campaign that I'm doing. So after Matan, Pengzai falls, then Hoku, and both times a little bit of tactical flooding. And remember, we've got to remember here that the geography is very mountainous and hilly. So it's not the plains of China where the floods can just spread for thousands of kilometers. It's very boxed in at this point. Zhujiang, the fighting is very severe. So Zhujiang is on the southern bank, and it was defended by, again, RDF forces. 80,000 RDF forces, so we're talking provincial troops. I think they were Henan province, one of the very poorly equipped army. 80,000 troops saw off the Japanese for 5 days of heavy, intense combat. And when the Japanese finally entered the city, of course, they set to butchering and raping and looting everybody they saw. So we've got to hand it to the resistance of the Henan province troops. And we've got to admit that the Japanese are paying heavily for their advance, you see, but they are still advancing, and Chiang is still kind of, even though in the rear, like I said, in the rear, he's actually getting the war he wants. In the rear, he's getting the war he wants. He's got the guerrilla warfare, and then a war on terrain that he can pick to defend. And with the tactical flooding, especially after the fall of Wuzhui, which is which is about 30 kilometers downriver from Tianjiazhen itself. This was the final step. The floodwaters crept up. This as far as much further. And of course, by the time the Chinese interpreted these floodwaters as a way to trap the 6th Division in this region. But the Chinese themselves lacked any capability to cross the water, to outflank the Japanese, to get behind them. And again, as I said at the very first episode introduced in this campaign, my next campaign, the Japanese have been on a huge boat building program. And the Japanese are not too shabby when it comes to navigating. So, the 6th Division, because of the advent of the floodwater, the 6th Division can be reinforced and resupplied directly. It took great navigation by the Japanese sailors, but they did get here, and they reinforced the 6th Division, counterattacked, broke the Chinese line here. Now, as I'd said, regular Chinese NRA forces were moving up to support the RDF, but Chen Cheng had decided to deploy them to cut the Japanese off here, to cut the Japanese off from a line of retreat, not to reinforce the RDF. So when the Japanese broke through, because of the terrain itself, the forces that Chen Cheng had sent couldn't match the Japanese or catch up with the Japanese. And the delay in doing that prevented them from going directly to Tianjiazhen to defend the fortress. Now, about the fortress itself. The fortress itself was a doozy of a fortress. And we've got to remember that with all these river operations, the Japanese had learned a lot. But they had learned it in blood. They had learned it in sunk ships. And they weren't keen to take on Matan. Matan had at least 28 big guns, and they ranged from 3-pounders, 6-pounders, 12-pounders, 203mm guns, all in batteries of 4 spread out at the narrowest point of the river on the northern bank, with sheer cliffs on the southern side of them, and themselves dug in on cliff-like positions. It was impregnable, and to back it up, there was 400 booms, believe it or not, 400 booms crossing the Yangtze, and mines. And the Japanese Navy didn't want to tackle that. So it was up to the 11th Army, 6th Division, a part of the 11th Army, to attack Tianjiazhen from the land. And as I said, the flooding, this tactical flooding, it was the end of the Tianjiazhen fortress. You know, this decision by Chiang to flood here doomed these troops. They would fight on for 2 weeks, heavily. You know, they would fall back to their fortress themselves with their backs to the river. Unfortunately, they couldn't get much support from their own artillery, couldn't reject, you know, couldn't turn around to where the fighting was. And as I said in the previous cases, their communications were always bad to, very hard for the Chinese to conduct counter-fire, indirect fire, lack of communications, lack of technical training. So the Japanese took Tianjiazhen after 2 weeks of heavy fighting. They drew back and used their artillery, because their heavy artillery had been left behind at Anqing because the terrain was too tough to move it. So with this supply route, they could catch up with their heavy artillery and be reinforced. And all those men that had to guard the rear, where the guerrilla activity was working for the Chinese, could be now transferred, or were transferred straight into the water to reinforce, counterattack, break the Chinese line here, and advance on Tianjiazhen from the rear. And Tianjiazhen, as I said before, after being attacked by chemical weapons. I hope that was understandable for you all. Hope that gets me a like and a few subscribers. Let's have a look at the forces I used. Okay, as again, I used my their Airfix World War I US infantry, and I've just converted them. You've seen them before, and I usually play these as well. I've actually never, I think I've played these once as Guangdong, which they are supposed to be. And Japanese, also Airfix. So yeah, it was the troop of the 6th Division hadn't eaten for 4 or 5 days before this, before the supply column opened up, and it just seems that this battle was a total underappreciation by the Chinese of Japanese amphibious capabilities. And by this time, September 1938, the Japanese are indeed the supreme masters of riverine warfare. And this is the last Tianjiazhen, was the last guard, the last fortress, the last major fortress before the fortress at the guns at Wuhan. And as I said, in 3 months of combat, the Japanese, at heavy casualties, had only advanced about 260 kilometers upriver in 3 months. I don't really think that counts as a blitzkrieg, because we've got to all the time they were having losses, as I said, from Chinese mines, and how can I put it? This was just a huge mistake to do the tactical flooding here. It cost Tianjiazhen, and as I said at the beginning of this campaign, in my first and the next campaign, it's unbelievable that how much the Chinese underestimated Japanese amphibious capabilities. And as I said, I'm going to play this as a war game, so I've got a regiment of 3 battalions of Chinese forces on the high ground, and a reinforced battalion of Japanese on the next ridge. Of course, you know, I've played around with the terrain and to make it fit to my scale. But that's what we have to do as a wargamer, isn't it? So the object of the game is, I haven't decided yet if I should have the Japanese start right at the edge of the table on their amphibious forces and try to wipe out the Japanese in attack with a Chinese attack, or just try to have the Chinese fend off the Japanese assault, reinforced assault. But perhaps I'll do both. Anyway, whatever I do, it'll be in the epilogue. So better subscribe if you don't want to miss that. That's all for now. See ya.